Coming up on Network Africa. Akinwumi Adesina sworn in as president of the African Development Bank for a second 5-year term. Zimbabwe's government says white farmers can apply to get their land back that was seized between 2000 and 2001 under a government program of land reform. Plus, 2 Mauritians killed in an accident near the site of Japanese ship oil spill. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shoboale.
I, Akinwumi Ayodeji Adesina,
President of the African Development Bank,
President of the African Development Bank,
solemnly declare and undertake before the chairperson of the Board of Governors and before the members of the Board of Directors that I will abide by the provisions of the agreement establishing the African Development Bank.
So help me God.
Nigeria's former Minister of Agriculture, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, has been sworn in for a second 5-year term as president of the African Development Bank, AFDB. Dr. Adesina was re-elected on Thursday last week. Upon taking the oath of office, he set out his plans of action for the next 5 years.
The COVID-19 pandemic has changed everything globally. It has thrown Africa's growth back. The continent has lost gains in economic growth that were achieved over the last decade. Africa's recovery will therefore be long and challenging. Now, we must help Africa build back boldly, but smartly, paying greater attention to quality growth, especially in the areas of health, climate, and the environment. As we look to the future, working with the boards of directors, the bank will pay increased attention to supporting Africa with quality health care infrastructure and building on its comparative advantage in infrastructure. The bank's infrastructure work will focus on economic infrastructure, quality physical infrastructure, health infrastructure. COVID-19 also opens up new opportunities and a greater sense of urgency to build Africa's manufacturing capacity, industrial development, and critically needed industrial value chains that must be supported by enabling infrastructure and policies. Special attention will be given to regional industrial value chains and strengthening of financial markets in order to expand intra-regional trade and competitiveness and to boost Africa continental free trade area. Your Excellencies, let there be no doubt the challenges ahead are still many, including poverty, inequality, fragility, high youth unemployment, significant infrastructure financing gaps, and sustainable debt management. As we look to the future, let me assure you the bank will play a greater role in policy dialogues with countries. We will support sustainable debt management, boost green growth, and accelerate the provision of jobs for youth on our beloved continent.
To other stories now, ousted Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir has appeared in court at the start of a trial over the military coup in which he took power in 1989. Mr. Bashir seemed to be in good physical condition as he appeared in a metal courtroom cage wearing white prison-issue clothes and a medical face mask that he lowered to identify himself. Some of his former associates appeared alongside him at the trial, which had been postponed because of overcrowding at the scheduled opening last month. Military officers ousted Omar al-Bashir in April 2019 after months of street protests leading to a power-sharing agreement between the military and civilian groups. Tuesday's court hearing comes a day after Sudan's transitional leadership signed a peace deal with some of the rebel groups that had battled Bashir's military and allied militias in Darfur. To politics now, Guinea's President Alpha Condé has formally accepted his party's nomination to seek a third term. Mr. Condé, who was first elected in 2010, pushed through a constitutional change in a referendum in March, which allowed him to stand for a third term. The vote was boycotted by the opposition and sparked mass protests. In early August, Guinea's ruling party nominated the 82-year-old president to represent it in the elections in October, but at the time, Mr. Condé made no formal response. Zimbabwe's government has announced that white farmers whose tracts of land were seized between 2000 and 2001 under a government program of land reform can apply to get them back. According to a joint statement by the Finance and Agriculture Ministry, in the case that the land cannot be given back, the farmers will be offered land elsewhere. The ministry also says the government would revoke offer letters to black farmers who were resettled in the land. Some 3,500 white farmers were evicted from their farms during the controversial land reforms. Well, let's get more on this story. Joining us now is Nigel Yamatumbu, a Zimbabwean journalist. Nigel, thanks for joining us on Network Africa.
Yes, sure, it's a pleasure.
Just help us understand this government offer to the white farmers.
Well, in what was a really bit of a shocking statement yesterday, a joint statement by Minister of Finance and that of Lands, which followed the move agreement by President Mnangagwa and white farmers to the tune that they're going to be compensated in the case. To just put a quick context, is that after independence, Zimbabwe attained independence in 1980, the arrangement was such that whoever a willing buyer, willing seller, the white farmers that had been settling within the prime lanes of the agrarian-based economy would agree on a mechanism. Now, in 2020 years later, in response to political pressure and a dwindling influence, there was that land reform, which without compensation, the farmers were taken off their farms. Now, the Constitution says they have to be compensated. The question is the modalities, and certainly there has been an uproar on how government has decided to proceed with this compensation to reverse what the Constitution says is irreversible.
But what is the general sentiment to this latest development? You know, land is quite a controversial subject in Zimbabwe.
Well, the general take so far, the opposition has been pointing at the ruling party's hypocrisy, that they for many years been arguing that the opposition is in place so that they can return the land back to the white commercial farmers. That has been so far their reaction to say, hey, look, you have done it yourself. We wouldn't have done it this way, because the Constitution says there ought to be an act of parliament before such a move has to be done. For now, what we have is only that joint statement. What will be critical, though, is to have a view of the white farmers themselves pronouncing themselves on the matter, and more critically, the international community, particularly the West, who have been largely critical around this land reform without compensation. So far, they haven't said anything.
All right, then, Nigel Yamatumbu, Zimbabwean journalist, thank you so much for joining us on Network Africa. Away from Zimbabwe, 2 crew members from a tugboat involved in cleaning up an oil spill in Mauritius have died after their vessel collided with a barge in heavy seas. A member of parliament says 4 other members of the crew were rescued by helicopter and 2 are still missing. The tugboat and barge sent out a distress signal at between 7:30 and 8 p.m., but unfortunately, the tugboat capsized after the collision. Both ships were working on moving parts salvaged from the site of the oil spill into the port. The MV Wakashio, a Japanese bulk carrier, struck a coral reef off the Indian Ocean Islands nation's coast in July, spilling thousands of tons of oil into the sea and choking sea life in a pristine lagoon. Now, the daughter of Hotel Rwanda film hero Paul Rusesabagina, who was arrested on terror charges, says the family hasn't heard from him and they believe he was kidnapped. Anis Kanimba says that the family last heard from him on Thursday when he called to say he had landed in Dubai. She added that her father couldn't have traveled to Rwanda on his own will. Mr. Rusesabagina is a well-known critic of President Paul Kagame and has been living outside Rwanda since 1996. His daughter says he has not sent out any message to them and that he put up a brave face when he was paraded on television after his arrest. Well, joining us now for more on this is Rwandan journalist Magnus Masimpaka. He joins us from Kigali. Magnus, thank you for joining us. At this point, what more can you tell us about the arrest of Mr. Rusesabagina?
This man was arrested in a mysterious circumstance, but of course the investigators and people who managed the arrest must have been extremely meticulous, well organized, and to the extent that it is very difficult to understand how the man who was speaking from the Western countries ended up in the hands of the law investigators and prosecutors in Rwanda. He last, I think he left Rwanda in 1994. It's been more than 26 years now he's back. And it was a very shocking but a little bit exciting moment for the survivors and also victims of his alleged crimes. I would also say that he's now under the custody of the Rwanda Investigation Bureau, awaiting to be assembled before court sometime soon.
Well, the Rwanda genocide is a very sensitive topic even now. Help us understand what role Paul Rusesabagina played that made him so well known.
He ran a hotel called Mille Collines, the one that was depicted in the movie Hotel Rwanda. So that hotel used to be the only hotel where UN troops had camped, but also under the protection of the RPA or RPF that was fighting the genocide soldiers or genocide troops. So what happened was that he was merely a hotel manager, but the hotel was not at all under his authority. But he ran the hotel. The hotel was under his management, but he didn't have authority. So he claimed to have used his authority to protect people, but literally speaking, for obvious reason that you can understand, in a situation of war and genocide, I don't think he had authority and powers to run and manage any facility that was under protection. It was literally impossible. But of course, after the genocide, he went around saying that he used his authority to protect survivors. But survivors that were staying in that hotel have testified, this is known knowledge that you can even find everywhere in books and on the internet, that they were paying for their own safety. It wasn't a generous gesture.
All right, then, Rwandan journalist Magnus Mazimpaka, thank you so much for joining us on Network Africa. A lot to keep our eyes on there. Still to come on the program. South Africa's tourism industry relies on cash-strapped local tourists to revive its sector. Details in a moment. Stay with us. South Africa's tourism industry relies on cash-strapped local tourists to revive its sector. Details in a moment. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. At least 51 people have been killed following heavy rains and flooding in Niger. The president says more than 26,000 houses have collapsed and some 280,000 people are in need of help. Meanwhile, in North Africa, officials in Sudan say 89 people have died as a result of rain and flooding. More than 38,000 homes have been destroyed. The Irrigation and Water Ministry says the Blue Nile has reached an all-time high since records began more than a century ago. Displaced twice, South Sudanese refugee James Tut believes the odds to finish university, and now he wants his children and his students to go even further. But access to higher education for refugees is limited. Globally, only 3% get the opportunity.
For every student, graduating from university is a cause for celebration. But for refugees, it is a genuine triumph over the odds. For refugees who have fled conflict in South Sudan, the proportion is even smaller. James Tut had hoped that with a degree in community development and leadership from the University of Addis Ababa, he might find employment with the government of South Sudan. But by the time he had finished his undergraduate studies in 2014, war had intervened and he found himself becoming a refugee in Ethiopia for a second time.
When the war was outbroke in South Sudan, that time I was in Ethiopia, in Addis Ababa University, from 2010 up to 2014. I have hope to be employed by my government. For my qualification, it is proportional of bachelor degree of community development and leadership.
Nevertheless, a university education has stood him in good stead. For the past few years, James has been vice principal of one of 4 primary schools in Gambella's Jewy refugee camp. Smartly dressed and softly spoken, he exudes a calm authority amid the din of boisterous children.
Here in Ethiopia, I have 5 years here as a teacher. My work is very interesting because it is time for me to serve my community. These children, they are the future of our country. When we return back, then they will develop our country.
As a degree holder, James is living proof of what refugees can achieve if given the chance. But as vice principal of the primary school in Gambella, he is all too aware of the problems his 6,000 pupils encounter daily. He also worries for his own children. His greatest fear being that without peace in South Sudan, if they remain in the refugee camp, they would not get the same opportunities to study as he did.
Authorities in Senegal have started to gradually reopen the country's 8 universities for in-person learning after they were closed for more than 5 months because of the coronavirus pandemic. However, the reopening will depend on the capacities of respective institutions to comply with COVID-19 safety protocols. Online courses are expected to continue for students still waiting to be recalled at Cheikh Anta Diop University in the capital, Dakar, the largest in the country with more than 71,000 students. Departments are reopening depending on their capacities to enforce safety measures. Most undergraduate students are expected to resume learning this week. The United Nations mission in South Sudan and development partners have rehabilitated and handed over 16 rooms to the COVID-19 Intensive Care Center in Yambio. This initiative was taken jointly with the State COVID-19 Task Force to ensure a fully equipped isolation facility in the region. Apart from refurbishing the rooms, UNMISS also handed over a generator, 20 bed and mattresses, 120 bed linens and water tanks with a capacity of 5,000 litres. Stella Abayomi, acting head of Field Office, UNMISS, Western Equatoria, says the centre is designed to help authorities and communities in COVID-19 preparedness. Now, following a 5-month lockdown, South Africa is easing domestic travel restrictions, allowing hotels to reopen. With international borders still closed, the government is pinning its hopes on domestic tourism, echoing a strategy being tried from Vietnam to New Zealand with mixed results.
The V&A waterfront in Cape Town, which is normally abuzz with tourists from around the world, is now empty, with just a few local customers coming in now and then to enjoy the city's scenic views.
Yeah, if you look around, it's really quite sad. I mean, this would normally a bustling part of the waterfront, and Robben Island would be running queues. But I think the opportunity for locals now is that this offer is going to be available without the queues, without the busyness.
South Africa remains among the countries hardest hit by the pandemic. And with recession-battered consumers watching their pocketbooks, many in the sector foresee an uphill battle.
The hardest hit obviously been the hotels. Most of our hotels are kind of upper end here, so most of the 5-6-star hotels are closed and they don't intend to open before December. After the hotels, the next worst hit has been restaurants. We've got about 80 restaurants within the waterfront and all of them closed.
Abundant wildlife, stunning scenery and renowned vineyards have made South Africa one of the world's iconic long-haul travel destinations, establishing tourism as a pillar of the economy. Last year, it welcomed over 10 million international visitors. But COVID-19 brought the sector to a screeching halt this year as government closed borders and imposed lockdowns.
The closing of our borders has impacted us because 70% of our tourists are international, especially in the Safari Lodge properties. So at this point, those properties are not being booked at all. Local tourism really in Cape Town it can survive, but it's at a hugely reduced rate. So for us, we really are opening just for the purpose of keeping our staff employed.
With South Africans now permitted to voyage between provinces for the first time since March, tourist-focused businesses are pivoting to domestic travelers in a bid to stay afloat. When international visitors will return is anyone's guess. Now is when they would normally book for the November to March high season. But it's unclear when South Africa's borders will reopen, and few expect a significant rebound in long-haul leisure travel when they do.
And that's the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Teniola Shoboale.